In the neon glare of the 1980s, one nation stood invincible. Japan had risen from the ashes of war to conquer the economic world. They did not use missiles. They used efficient cars and superior electronics. By 1985, the American empire felt a shadow growing across the Pacific. Detroit was crumbling, while Toyota and Honda were surging in popularity. Sony and Panasonic were the household names of the future, not G. At the peak, the Imperial Palace grounds were worth more than all of California. When Mitsubishi bought Rockefeller Center, it felt like an economic Pearl Harbor. The American media declared Japan the new threat to national survival. Movies like Blade Runner depicted a future owned and operated by Japanese corporations. The US trade deficit was exploding, draining American wealth to Tokyo. President Reagan faced immense pressure from Congress to stop the bleeding. American industry could not compete because the US dollar was too strong. A strong dollar made American exports expensive and Japanese imports incredibly cheap. The US needed a strategy to cripple their rival without firing a shot. The solution was a secret meeting orchestrated by the US Treasury. Treasury Secretary James Baker summoned the finance ministers of the G5 nations. They gathered at the Plaza Hotel in New York on September 22, 1985. Britain, France, West Germany, Japan, and the United States sat down. The atmosphere was polite, but the American demand was brutal. The US demanded that Japan allow the yen to appreciate significantly. They argued that a stronger yen would balance global trade. In reality, it was a mechanism to make Japanese products too expensive. Japan, dependent on US military protection, felt they had no choice. They signed the Plaza Accord, sealing the fate of their economic miracle. Almost overnight, the value of the US dollar collapsed against the yen. Japanese exports became twice as expensive for American consumers to buy. The export engine that powered Japan began to sputter and stall. Faced with an export recession, the Bank of Japan panicked. To save the domestic economy, they slashed interest rates to record lows. They flooded the system with cheap money to stimulate domestic spending. But this liquidity did not go into factories, it went into speculation. The cheap money ignited the greatest asset bubble in human history. Golf club memberships were trading for millions of dollars. Corporate expense accounts knew no limits in the late 80s. The Nikkei stock index climbed vertically, defying all logic and gravity. Real estate prices in Tokyo became mathematically impossible for normal people. Japanese banks became the largest in the world by market capitalization. It was a euphoria born of cheap credit and a manipulated currency. But the Plaza Accord had planted a time bomb in the foundation. The economy was no longer built on production, but on inflated assets. By 1989, the Bank of Japan realized the bubble was lethal. They decided to raise rates to cool the market down. They intended to slow the bubble, but they popped it instead. On the first trading day of 1990, the crash began. Trillions of dollars in paper wealth evaporated into the air. Real estate values plummeted, trapping millions in negative equity. The banks were left holding bad loans, becoming zombie banks. This marked the beginning of the lost decade for Japan. Growth stopped, wages stagnated, the vibrancy of the 80s died. A generation of youth withdrew from society, known as the hikikomori. The government tried to spend its way out, building bridges to nowhere. They paved rivers and built empty airports to keep construction alive. Japan became the most indebted nation on Earth relative to GDP. The economic juggernaut had been successfully neutralized by its ally. The US had won the economic war without deploying a single soldier. The Plaza Accord is the smoking gun of economic statecraft. But today, the mirror reflects a new challenger. We are seeing the exact same pattern emerge with China. Like Japan, China rose through massive exports and manufacturing dominance. Like Japan, China is now viewed as the primary threat. Washington is once again using the playbook of currency and trade war. Tariffs, sanctions, and export controls are the new Plaza Accord. The CHIPS Act is designed to strangle China's technological ascent. But Beijing has studied the history of the 1980s carefully. They are determined not to fall into the same trap. They refuse to float their currency freely to please the West. They are hoarding gold and commodities to reduce dependence on dollars. They are building their own trade networks to bypass American demand. The conflict is different, but the mechanics are identical. It is the story of the incumbent versus the challenger. The dominant empire will use every tool to maintain its position. Currency is not neutral. It is a weapon of mass destruction. It can destroy industries faster than a bombing campaign. It can hollow out the middle class of a rival nation. Japan never truly recovered its momentum after the bubble burst. They settled into a comfortable but stagnant decline. The land of the rising sun became the land of the setting sun. The question is, will the dragons suffer the same fate? Or have they learned the countermoves to survive the game? I am the monetary cartographer, and this is the map. We chart the hidden wars that define your reality. Understanding the past is the only way to protect your future. Secure your assets outside the system of control. History does not repeat, but it often rhymes. Let us look closer at the cultural impact of the crash. The legendary work ethic of the salaryman became a curse. They worked harder for diminishing returns year after year. The shame of bankruptcy drove thousands to tragic ends. The sea of trees became a grim symbol of economic despair. The social contract of lifetime employment was shattered forever. Secure careers were replaced by temporary, precarious contract work. Marriage rates collapsed as financial stability evaporated. The birth rate plummeted, creating a demographic time bomb. An aging population supported by a shrinking workforce. This is the long-term cost of the bubble bursting. The Bank of Japan invented quantitative easing to survive. They printed money to buy government bonds and stocks. The central bank became the largest owner of Japanese stocks. They created a zombie market that cannot function without support. Does this sound familiar to American observers today? The US Federal Reserve is now following the Japanese playbook. We are becoming Japan decades later. The Japanification of the global economy is the final stage. When growth dies, debt is the only thing that grows. The Plaza Accord kicked the first card. It set in motion a chain reaction we are still living. The trade war with China is the sequel to this movie. But the ending might be very different this time around. China is not a military vassal of the United States. They have the power to say no to a Plaza Accord. This inevitably leads to a complete bifurcation of the global economy. Two systems, two currencies, and two distinct spheres of influence. The globalized world of the 90s is officially dead forever. We are returning to an era of great power competition. Economics is the primary battlefield of this new total war. The primary battleground has shifted from cars to advanced microchips. The island of Taiwan sits at the center of this hurricane. The US banned the export of high-end chips to China. This is a desperate attempt to freeze China's technological time. But technology has a way of leaking through every wall. Huawei developed its own chips despite the crippling American sanctions. This proves that economic containment has diminishing returns over time. Financial sanctions are the artillery of this modern economic warfare. Locking nations out of SWIFT weaponizes the entire banking system, but using the weapon too often degrades its immense power. Nations are seeking alternatives to avoid the American financial trap. Central banks are buying gold at the fastest pace in history. They are trading paper promises for hard, tangible, physical assets. Meanwhile, the US suffers from the Plaza Accord's long shadow. By crushing Japan, Wall Street financialized the entire American economy. Manufacturing fled to cheaper shores, leaving only rust belts behind. Bankers replaced engineers as the true captains of American industry. This created the massive wealth inequality we see in America today. The predator ultimately became the victim of its own success. The lesson of the Plaza Accord is about unintended consequences. Economic hubris often leads directly to long-term imperial decline. We are entering a volatile period of disorder and realignment. The unipolar moment of the 90s is officially over forever. A chaotic multipolar world is emerging from the smoking wreckage. You must prepare your own portfolio for this new reality. True diversification is no longer a luxury, it is survival. Do not keep all your eggs in one jurisdictional basket. What happens when the dollar finally loses its global dominance? The privilege of printing the world's reserve currency will end. Inflation will return home to the shores of North America. Living standards will drop as imports become much more expensive. This is the inevitable cost of weaponizing the financial system. Japan taught us that markets can remain irrational for decades. They taught us that zombie banks can paralyze a nation. Now the United States is staring into that same mirror. The debt is the anchor that will drag us down. There is no Plaza Accord to save us this time. The East has learned the lessons of the past well. They are playing a long game while we play quarters. Economic sovereignty is the only true defense against financial warfare. Your personal defense is understanding the game being played. Do not be a pawn in their global trade war. Information is the lighthouse that guides you through the crash. I am the monetary cartographer, charting these dangerous global waters. The map is the only thing that can save you. Stay oriented, stay vigilant, and watch the flows of capital. Secure your wealth before the next Plaza Accord is signed. The sun sets on empires, but it rises on prepared individuals. This is the story of how the world really works. End of transmission.